This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Nancy Benson. This week, why we eat what we eat.
People who like a lot of sensation, and burning in your mouth is a lot of sensation, are more likely to be sensation seekers.
The science behind our relationship with food when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
If you go back a decade, the thought that you could get something delivered to your doorstep in a day or two after you ordered it was pretty much unthinkable.
Exploring the competitive e-commerce space. Then,
she would flutter her fan according to the Morse code dots and dashes. If one of her spies was watching, they would be able to read the Morse code dot and dashes that she was doing with her fan.
Uncovering the stories of fearless women on both sides of the fight during the Civil War. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station, and subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
Why do some people love to eat jalapeno peppers, but others can't stand foods that hot? Why do some people drink their coffee black and others add cream and sugar? Well, it turns out the answers are surprisingly complex and varied. So much so that it's even become a scientific field called neurogastronomy.
Neurogastronomy is a new field that is taking the science of nutrition, of the neuroscience of what happens when you consume food, and our perception and our psychology and all the things that go into making food into one domain called neurogastronomy. And the idea is to be able to basically explain our relationship with food and all the factors that go into it.
That's Rachel Herz, adjunct assistant professor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown University, and author of Why You Eat What You Eat, the science behind our relationship with food. Herz breaks down the complex field of neurogastronomy into its basic components, starting with taste.
Taste is the ability to detect chemicals that are dissolved in the saliva in our mouth, and we respond to 4 of them specifically: salt, sour, sweet, and bitter. And each of them is referencing a different kind of chemical, and different receptors are responsive to each of them differently, and then they trigger specific reactions in our brain to be able to perceive them and to like them or dislike them.
However, Herz says there's some controversy as to whether there are more than just these 4 basic tastes.
The most famous one and the most contentious one, I think, is umami. A lot of people consider that a 5th basic taste. I don't, because it tastes really, really similar to salt. Another controversial taste these days is fat. So there are people who say that fat is another basic taste. And things like calcium even, or there's metallic taste and all kinds of things.
And while we're talking about taste, what about those ubiquitous tongue maps you've seen that show where receptors for specific tastes are located on the tongue?
The idea that we have a tongue map, that is to say that there are specific areas on our tongue that only are sensitive to one taste, like the back of the mouth is where you detect bitter, you can't detect it on the tip of your tongue or the sides of your tongue, or the tip of the tongue is where you detect sweet, you can't detect it anywhere else. That is totally wrong. You can detect all taste sensations everywhere. And this development of a tongue map actually has a fun history, sort of fun. I mean, if you think these myths have a fun basis, in that it started off with the misinterpretation by a Harvard professor in the early 1940s of an old paper that was written by a graduate student in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. So I think it was like 1901 when the paper was first written. And this person misinterpreted what the student had written in the paper in German, and then wrote his interpretation in a very famous textbook that was published in English in the early 1940s.
But why do some people love hot chili peppers when others won't go near them? Why do some people love the taste of coffee while others think it's really bitter? Herz says part of the reason is whether or not you're what she calls a super taster.
Super tasters are extremely sensitive to bitter. They're also sensitive to other sensations like sweet and creaminess and the sting of peppers and so forth. But super tasters are most likely to either put sugar or cream or both into their coffee to dull down the bitterness. And so people who really like black coffee are people who are less sensitive to bitter overall, but we've also learned a very powerful emotional connection to coffee that can make us override the unpleasantness to a large degree.
But being a super taster or not is just one factor that can dictate food preferences. It turns out your personality also has a lot to do with the food choices you make.
People who really like hot, spicy foods, there tends to be a correlation with being what's known as sensation-seeking. So this is a personality trait that's connected to extroversion and means that you like trying daring, new, exciting things like, skydiving or, I love to get lost when I'm in a new city, or I'll just try anything because it seems interesting and exciting, or I love riding roller coasters and that kind of stuff. So people who like a lot of sensation, and burning in your mouth is a lot of sensation, are more likely to be sensation seekers. So people who are hot pepper lovers are likely to be sensation seekers in other domains of their life, but they're unlikely to be super tasters.
Emotions also may give us cravings for certain foods.
Most of our cravings are for things that give us pleasure. So, going back to sweet and fat, both of those stimuli, when we perceive them in our mouth, they trigger dopamine, which is the reward neurotransmitter. They trigger endorphins, which is our body's natural morphine. So they literally relieve us of any pain we're feeling, either physically or emotionally. They make us feel really good. They're giving us instant joy. And the problem is that most likely you don't need to consume those nutrients for a health and survival perspective. You just want them because it makes you feel good.
However, many people have problems with food. Over a third of all adults in the U.S. are obese. Hers says making good food choices is like walking a tightrope, where we constantly balance what we want to eat with what we need to eat.
My whole position, though, isn't that anyone should restrict themselves. I want people to get joy and pleasure from food. So it's fine to have the cookie. It's fine to have that ice cream sundae, but just not too much of it. So to recognize, okay, here's where I'm getting pleasure, and so now it's worth it. I don't maybe need the calories for survival, but getting the pleasure is a good thing. The first bite is definitely pure pleasure. But after the 5th bite, after the 8th bite, after the 10th bite, is it really still pleasure? And so ask yourself, and this is something that I actually do as well, are the calories in worth the pleasure in? And if you say yes, then it's okay to eat it. If you say no, then that's the time to stop.
Hers believes that knowing why you eat what you eat can help give you the power to control what and how much food you consume. You can learn more about all our guests through a link on our website at radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer this week is Polly Hansen. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson.
Radio Health Journal returns in just a moment.
A good night's sleep means everything no matter where you are. Luckily, there's a CPAP machine for home and away. The Philips DreamStation Go offers the best of both worlds, a lightweight and discreet travel CPAP designed for everyday use that can be carried wherever you go. Dr. Mark Aloya is Global Lead for Behavior Change at Philips Healthcare.
Most people don't realize that missing just one night of CPAP therapy, which happens often when we travel for business or for pleasure, can put you right back to square one. Now there are more options than ever for CPAP therapy with the recent introduction of travel-sized CPAP devices like the Philips DreamStation Go.
Whether you're at home sleeping soundly or chasing a new adventure on the road, the Philips DreamStation Go is the everyday travel CPAP you want by your bedside. Find out more at philips.com/DreamStationGo. That's PHILIPS.com/DreamStationGo.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
They did not want to be judged. They didn't want to hear how bad the behavior in question was for them. They were embarrassed.
Fibbing to our doctors. Almost everybody does it for what we think are good reasons.
Then an unhealthy byproduct of avoiding germs during the pandemic.
This clean living to the extreme, which on the one hand is necessary, but on the other hand can potentially cause us problems because of our lack of exposure to these good microbes.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.